all of your violence against police officers has come from colored people, as well as multiculturalism. If we backtracked America, well, let's go back to the 50s. There were less than a few thousand convicted felons in America. There were absolutely no gun laws denying ex-felons the right to own firearms. There was no criminal background checks passed out to the public, so convicted felons could not get jobs and rent homes. And usually, convicted felons back then committed one crime, the hard time they did in prison, and a short sentence cured their problems. And most convicted felons back in them days did not return to commit more crimes. They had a very low recidivism rate. So there was no need for harsh gun laws and hard prison sentences, and there was no need for passing criminal records out to the public. Now, in the 60s, you had the blacks and the Mexicans, the Indians and the Jews. They were all demanding preferential treatment through the Civil Rights Act. And they began getting preferential treatment during the 60s. And it was during this time era of the 60s that you've seen an increase, a tenfold increase in crime and violent crime. Because the colored people began knocking white people out of jobs, and this began creating crime. More crime. The colored people were primarily the ones who committed majority of the crimes in the 50s and in the 60s. And as they began to advance, they began to push the white people into committing crimes because the white people were being knocked out of jobs by these colored people. And all of your extreme violence today is because of our multiculturalism. All the crime that you see white people committing is a direct result from colored people taking their jobs and rising up to take them and knock them out of power and push them into crime. That's why you have an increase in crimes by white people. And black people have not given up their crimes. They have been just as vicious as white people. And the increase in crime has been tenfold. Well, in the 60s and the 70s, the socialists began to rise in power. The hard line on crime types, one strike you're out, maximum sentences, pass criminal records out to the public so they can't get jobs and rent homes, take their firearms away from them so that they cannot defend their wife, their children, and their very own lives. Let's stomp out crime. You heard this mantra coming from the socialist police state types in government. And since the 60s, on the way up to now, 2010, you have seen an increase in the amount of convicted felons in this nation go from a few thousand to millions of us today. Now, are we going to turn this nation into a socialist police state where people known as convicted felons by the millions have no constitutional rights whatsoever? They're forced to live as a second-class, poverty-stricken citizen and done more unjustly than any group of people ever known in this nation. Are we going to get worse? And the prediction is yes. How do we handle it? We have to change the way we handle all convicted felons. We have to stop passing their criminal records out. We have to restore their rights to defend their lives and protect their children and their wives by allowing them to own and possess firearms for self-defense. And these things have to change, or we will live in a Soviet Union, 1950, socialist police state.